Alright folks, when last we left we had built out this lower poly alien looking model, and we're heading towards putting some eyeballs in here and eventually making him ready for rigging and animation. Again, a little bit more with the modeling refinement. If I go into vertices here, it gives me the ability to refine. So I'm going to make these eyeballs a little bit bigger. Notice I have soft selection on, sort of dissipates that transformation or softens that transformation throughout the geometry rather than just being a harsh transformation. So if I turn it off, I push and pull a single vert, but if I have it on, I can push and pull many different vertices at the same time. And so, yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And then I'm going to scale out these eyeballs and make them a little bit more fun. And you can even do a non-linear or non-uniform transformation there. And you can always use smooth preview if you're not sure where you're going with it. My attempt to keep them sort of round and maybe just size them up across the board here. It's going okay, but I've got eye sockets in here. Once you get to a place where you're satisfied with your model, we're going to actually apply a mesh smooth here in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and move this back just a bit more. And I've got symmetry on. Look at what the smooth result is going to be. And then I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to go ahead and take this guy and say he's pretty much done for what we're going for. And then I'm going to come up here to mesh and smooth. There's another really cool trick in Maya. If you hold down the space bar, you also have on-the-fly access to all these menus. So if I was in expert mode, which is control space, getting all that interface out of the way, I can just go here and go to mesh, for example. And if I wanted to peel one out, I could do that from the top. But I'm going to go ahead and go to smooth. Anytime you see a box next to anything, that means there's options. So I'm going to click on the box and I'm going to go division levels 1. If I apply that, you can see that it's now smoothed. 11 is definitely a bad idea, so I'm going to close that and actually undo what I just did there. Come back and then go to smooth again, and then just apply that. And that's a single smoothing division there. So you can see sort of what the end result of that is. The nice thing is if I go to attribute editor over here, under attributes for this object, way over here, if I right click, I've got smooth face 1. I can actually up these levels. So if I take this and drag it over to 2, you can see what 2 would look like. Now, that again, the more polys you have, the more work the computer has to do. Also, the more work you might have to do. So, be mindful of that as you're working with things. Depending on what your desired workflow is, that might not be the best idea. I'm actually going to bring it back to 1, just in case that's a problem down the road, and I don't want to have to deal with it. So, now I need to get some eyeballs in this guy. And depending on, again, what your desired result is, I'm going to go ahead and use the space bar here, go to create, and I'm going to create a polygon primitive sphere. And I'm going to create that sphere from the front view so that the top pole is pointing at me, because this is actually going to provide me with geometry that I want in order to get this thing looking the way that I want it. So I'm going to eyeball it, pun intended, until it looks right. And this is where multi-views are so powerful. You may also want to go shading and go to X-ray, so you can kind of see through and see how much volume that is taking up. Look at your top view until you can get it shaped into about where you want it. You want that thing to be not colliding with or interfering with anything beyond the geometry on the interior. It's okay if it collides with a bit in the back, at least in this case. That would be kind of a sloppy move, but if it's hidden, you're probably in pretty good shape. So again, I'm just going to tweak this and move it around. Now, one of the things that's interesting is if you look at the channel box, it gives you all of these options here, looking at translation, rotation, and scale. And it gives you an idea of the orientation of this object, right? So what I'm going to do now is actually create another one. So I'm going to go up here and go to modify, or actually I'll go ahead and I'll use mirror. And I'm going to click on mirror here, and it allows me to mirror the axis on the world. Now, if I go to edit and reset settings, you can see what the default setting is. The mirror axis is X, and if I apply that, notice how it jumped away, right? So we got an undesired result there. It went somewhere, okay? So we're going to cut the geometry. We don't need to do that. The geometry type is going to go ahead and be a copy, right? So we want to make that copy. You also have the option of instance or flip. Mirror axis is going to be negative across the X, meaning we're going backwards that way. Merge border vertices, we don't need to combine with original, and we'll leave that alone. And if we apply that now, with all these settings in place, we created a copy, we mirrored it across the world axis, and we did not cut the geometry, did not combine with the original. If I go over here to my outliner, you'll be able to see we've got polysphere 1 and polysphere 1 there, and then polysphere 2. Now you'll see that it's connected, right? This polysphere and this polysphere have two different elements. When we come back in our next video, we'll talk a little bit about how to deal with this. But for now, suffice to say, we're on our way. We've got our two spheres. Last little thing before the end of the video, I can grab both of these. I'm just going to move them up a little bit on the axis so they fit in about where I want them there. Alright, so next round we'll clean this up a little bit more and get it ready for rigging.